Chris had never imagined that his trip to the safari would change his life forever. As he ventured deeper into the dense brush of the African savanna, the last thing he expected to find was a small, trembling lion cub. He'd been on many safaris before, but this moment was different. The cub was alone, its tiny body weak and frail, lying motionless on the ground as if it had been abandoned by the world itself. Chris's heart sank. In that moment, everything else around him faded. The vast wilderness, the distant roar of lions, the sound of the wind, all disappeared. It was just him and the cub. Without thinking, he dropped to his knees beside the helpless animal. The cub's fur was matted, its eyes barely open, struggling to stay awake. Chris could hear its shallow breaths, each one more labored than the last. His pulse quickened. He knew this was not the place for such a vulnerable creature. The jungle was a cruel place for the weak. His mind raced with thoughts of how he could help, how he could save this fragile life. Without hesitation, he gently scooped the cub into his arms, feeling the weight of its fragile form. The cub looked up at him, and for a fleeting moment their gazes locked. There was a desperate sadness in those eyes, a silent plea for help. In that instant, Chris made a promise. He would do whatever it took to save this little life, no matter the cost. As he cradled the cub in his arms, he could feel its heartbeat, faint but steady. It was a connection that transcended words, a bond formed out of compassion and need. He couldn't leave it there. He had to try. Chris carried the cub back through the thick underbrush, each step filled with uncertainty. The jungle around him seemed to grow darker, the weight of the situation heavy on his shoulders. The cub was so small, so delicate, and Chris's heart ached with the thought of what might happen if he failed. But as he walked, a sense of determination began to rise within him. He wasn't just rescuing a lion cub, he was giving it a chance at life. And in that quiet, desperate moment, the chance was everything. Chris arrived at the Rehabilitation Center, his heart pounding with fear and hope. He gently placed the cub on the examination table, his hands trembling as the staff hurried to assess its condition. The cub was barely responsive, its body cold and frail. The team of veterinarians worked quickly, but the concern on their faces told Chris what he already feared. This wasn't going to be easy. They warned him that the chances were slim, but Chris wouldn't back down. Not after everything he had witnessed in the jungle. Not after he'd promised that this little creature wouldn't be abandoned again. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Chris was there by the cub's side. He fed it, tended to its wounds, and whispered soft words of encouragement. The cub, now named Leo, began to show small signs of improvement. It would stir slightly when Chris entered the room, its eyes flickering open just a little longer each time. The first time Leo responded to his touch, a tiny movement of the paw, Chris felt a warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Despite Leo's struggle, Chris never left his side. There were moments of doubt, moments when it seemed like the little cub might not make it. The doctors weren't sure if his body could handle the treatments, and every day Chris held his breath, waiting to see if Leo would continue to fight. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally. Yet each day, Leo fought back. With every ounce of energy, with every labored breath, it was as if the cub was saying, "I'm not ready to give up." The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't just about saving Leo anymore. It was about being there for him, showing him that there was still kindness in the world. Chris would stay by his side late into the night, even when his own body begged for rest. He would talk to Leo, telling him stories of the world outside, of the savannah where he would one day run free. He didn't know if Leo understood, but he felt a strange peace knowing he had given the cub his best chance. One evening, after a long, tiring day, Chris sat by Leo's side as the cub stretched out beside him, its breathing steady for the first time in days. Chris allowed himself a small smile. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something beautiful. The days that followed were filled with a quiet hope, but Chris couldn't ignore the growing concern gnawing at his mind. Leo was improving, yes, but not enough. The cub was still weak, and the staff warned him that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. Chris watched every change, no matter how small, with careful eyes. Yet, even as Leo's health seemed to stabilize, there was an undeniable sense that something was off. Leo wasn't getting stronger as quickly as Chris had hoped. His once playful energy remained absent, and the spark in his eyes wasn't fully ignited. It was then that Chris's thoughts turned dark. He couldn't keep Leo at the center forever. As much as he loved the cub, as much as he had given his all to help him survive, reality was setting in. Leo was a wild animal, and the more he thought about it, the clearer it became that Leo belonged in the wild, not in captivity. The thought of letting go of the cub, of sending him back into the harsh world from which he had come, was unbearable. Chris had fought so hard for this little life, and yet now he was being asked to face the most difficult choice of all: to set Leo free. The days grew more tense as Chris spent hours in the small room, watching the cub as it slept or looked around the room with a quiet sadness. His love for Leo had grown beyond anything he had anticipated. He felt a deep, aching connection to the cub, as if they had shared something so profound that no one could truly understand. It broke his heart to think that Leo might never feel completely safe again, that the wild would swallow him whole. But Chris couldn't keep him here forever, not when the cub's future was out there in the wild, where he truly belonged. As the weeks wore on, Chris found himself sitting by Leo's side, tears in his eyes. He didn't know if he could be strong enough to let go, but deep down, he knew that he had to do what was best for Leo, even if it meant saying goodbye. Leo had fought so hard to survive. Now, it was time for him to fight for his place in the world, for his rightful home, where he could finally be free. Chris whispered softly to Leo, "You're ready. You fought so hard. It's time for you to go." The morning came when Chris knew he had to make the hardest decision of his life. He stood by Leo's side, the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. The cub, now a young lion, had grown stronger over the weeks, but there was still something in his eyes, a quiet longing for something more, something beyond the walls of the Rehabilitation Center. Chris had nurtured him, cared for him, and loved him, but now it was time to set him free. With trembling hands, Chris opened the door to Leo's pen, watching the cub's hesitant movements. Leo seemed to understand what was happening. His ears perked, his body tense. For a moment, there was silence between them. Chris and Leo, caught in a moment of shared understanding. It was as if both knew this was the final step in their journey together. The bond they had formed was undeniable, but the path ahead was one Leo had to walk alone, in the wild. Chris's heart ached as Leo slowly stepped out of the pen and into the open space. He watched the cub take cautious steps, his body moving with the grace and strength Chris had always hoped for. The sight of Leo walking into the unknown, leaving behind the safety of the shelter, was heartbreaking. But Chris knew this was right. Leo wasn't meant to live in captivity. He was a lion, a creature of the wild, and the jungle called to him. With every step Leo took, Chris felt a surge of pride, mixed with a deep sorrow. It was a bittersweet moment, watching the cub he had saved grow into the majestic creature he was meant to be. But there was no turning back now. Chris whispered under his breath, "You're free now, Leo. Go find your pride." As Leo disappeared into the tall grass, Chris felt a lump form in his throat. He watched until Leo was nothing more than a shadow in the distance, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he had done the right thing. Letting go of Leo was the hardest thing Chris had ever done, but he knew it was an act of kindness. It was the ultimate gift he could give, a chance at life in the wild, a future where Leo could truly be free. The pain of saying goodbye would stay with him, but the love he had for Leo and the strength of their bond would never fade. Chris returned to the rehabilitation center, his heart a mixture of emptiness and hope. The day had been harder than he ever anticipated. As the hours passed, he found himself looking out into the open savanna, expecting to see Leo, but all he saw was the quiet landscape stretching out before him. His mind kept returning to the image of Leo's retreating form, disappearing into the wild. The cub was free, but in that freedom, Chris had lost a part of himself. The next morning, as he went about his routine, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It had only been a day since he had let Leo go, but there was an undeniable sense of longing that gnawed at him. He had done what was best for Leo, he kept telling himself, but the pain of the separation was still raw. He couldn't help but wonder if he had made the right choice. Was it possible Leo would survive in the wild on his own? Would he be okay? The uncertainty weighed heavily on Chris's heart. Then, just as he was about to head home, something caught his eye. At first, it was just a movement in the distance, a flash of golden fur among the tall grass. Chris froze, his breath catching in his throat. He rubbed his eyes, unsure if he was seeing things. But no, there it was again, closer now. His heart skipped a beat as he realized that Leo was back. Chris stepped forward, unsure of what to do. He didn't want to approach too quickly and scare the young lion, but at the same time he couldn't bear the thought of letting him go again. Leo was no longer the small, fragile cub he had found in the jungle. He had grown stronger, more confident. But as he walked closer, Chris saw that Leo wasn't alone. Behind him, a group of adult lions followed, watching Chris with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The sight stunned Chris into silence. Leo had returned, not just as a single cub, but with a pride. His heart swelled with emotion as the realization hit him. Leo had found his place in the world, and his journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Chris stood still, his breath caught in his throat as the lions circled around him. Leo was in the center, but now he was no longer the helpless cub he had once been. The adult lions moved with a quiet confidence, their eyes watching Chris with a strange, almost reverent gaze. Leo, standing beside them, looked back at Chris, his golden eyes reflecting a bond that words couldn't explain. The cub, now a young lion, had found his pride, and somehow they had come to him. Chris felt a rush of emotions flood through him. He had spent so many nights wondering if Leo would ever truly belong in the wild. He had worried that the cub he loved would not make it, that the harsh reality of the savannah would consume him. But here, Leo was, thriving, surrounded by the pride he was always meant to be a part of. The realization hit him like a wave. The love he had given Leo, the kindness he had shown, had brought him to this moment. The adult lions seemed to understand that Chris was no threat, but they were protective of Leo. One lioness stepped forward, her eyes locked onto Chris's, as if silently acknowledging the bond he shared with the young lion. Leo, noticing the lioness's movements, stepped closer to her, yet his gaze never left Chris. It was as though he was silently thanking him, showing Chris that he was safe now, that he had found his place. Chris's chest tightened as he watched Leo interact with the pride. It was everything he had hoped for and more. The cub that had once depended on him for survival had now found a new family, a new sense of belonging, and Chris had played a part in that. He had given Leo the chance to live, to thrive in a world that was meant for him. The pride slowly moved away, and Chris stepped back, his heart heavy but full of pride. He whispered, his voice cracking, "You've come home, Leo." As he turned to walk away, a soft roar echoed in the distance, a sound of strength and freedom. Chris paused, feeling the weight of the moment. Leo was no longer his responsibility. He had become something greater. And that thought, though bittersweet, filled him with peace. As Chris walked back to the rehabilitation center, his heart felt strangely lighter, though still heavy with the knowledge that he would never see Leo the way he had before. The lion had found his place, his pride. And yet, Chris couldn't help but feel the absence of the little cub that had once curled up in his arms. He had always known this day would come, but facing it head-on was different than he had imagined. The pain of letting go lingered, but there was a quiet pride in knowing that Leo was where he truly belonged. For days, Chris couldn't shake the image of the lions surrounding him, their protective gaze, their respect for what he had done. He never thought that kindness could bridge the gap between species the way it had with Leo. It wasn't just the physical care he had provided. It was the trust, the love he had shown a creature who, by all rights, should have feared him. Leo's return, accompanied by the pride, had been a confirmation of something Chris had never expected. An act of kindness had changed the fate of not just one lion, but an entire pride. The world had started to notice the story of the rescued lion, how a human's compassion had helped a wild animal heal and find its true nature. The story of Leo's journey spread like wildfire, capturing hearts and sparking conversations about the power of empathy and the interconnectedness of all life. Chris's phone rang incessantly with messages from people who had been touched by the bond between him and Leo, from animal rights activists to everyday people just moved by the idea that love could truly heal. But Chris didn't care for the recognition. His mind returned to the pride, to the roaring lions in the distance, and to Leo's unmistakable gaze as he disappeared into the savannah. He wasn't interested in accolades or praise. All that mattered now was the knowledge that Leo was out there, living the life he was always meant to lead. The quiet moments, the days spent in the shelter with the cub, had been enough. In those brief moments of companionship, he had learned more than he ever imagined about kindness, sacrifice, and the silent bond that connects all living things. Chris sat alone in his small office, looking out toward the horizon. He closed his eyes and whispered softly, "Goodbye, Leo." His heart was aching, but there was peace now, knowing that his act of kindness had set something beautiful into motion. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of hope, not just for Leo, but for the world. As time passed, the story of Leo and Chris spread far beyond the borders of the rehabilitation center. People from all walks of life reached out, deeply moved by the incredible bond that had formed between them, a bond that had transcended species and reminded the world of the power of kindness. Chris's story, once a quiet chapter in his life, had become an inspiration to thousands, perhaps even millions. He had unknowingly sparked a conversation about the healing power of empathy, the importance of compassion, and the unspoken connections that can form when kindness is given without expectation. Yet, despite the growing recognition, Chris never saw himself as a hero. He didn't want the attention. What mattered to him was the simple truth. Leo had been given a second chance, and through that, he had learned more about himself than he ever imagined. The love and care he had shown Leo had come full circle. It was as if, by helping the lion cub, Chris had unknowingly healed a part of himself too. He had faced his own fears and doubts, and in doing so had set Leo free, giving the young lion the life he was meant to live. In the quiet moments when Chris would sit by the window and look out at the vast African plains, he would sometimes hear a distant roar. It was Leo, he was sure of it. A small smile would tug at Chris's lips, and for a brief moment the world felt perfect. The bond between them would never be broken, even if they were no longer together. Leo had gone on to become the majestic creature he was always destined to be, and Chris, too, had found his own peace in knowing that he had played a part in that transformation. As he watched the sun set over the horizon one evening, Chris knew his life had been changed forever. The kindness he had extended to one tiny helpless cub had, in turn, changed him in ways he couldn't fully explain. He hadn't just saved a lion, he had found the beauty in selfless acts, the joy in giving without expecting anything in return. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift of all. If this story touched your heart, imagine what more we can do together. Leo and Chris's story proves that even the smallest act of kindness can make a world of difference. If you believe in the power of love, compassion, and second chances, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that inspire and change lives. Together, we can keep spreading kindness to the world. Thank you for being part of this journey.